Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, September the 25th, 2025. Today I want to talk about the horoscope of Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York. Now, not everyone is going to appreciate the fact that I want to look at her horoscope. I mean, a lot of people don't care about the royal family, the British royal family. I don't particularly care about them. But I've never looked at Sarah Ferguson's horoscope before. I mean, I have just looked at it. I don't actually find it a very interesting chart. But people are talking about her a great deal in the light of her email sent in 2011 relating to Jeffrey Epstein. So I thought it might be a good opportunity to look at her horoscope, look at what's going on at the moment for her, and perhaps look at how her chart and Prince Andrew's chart come together. But before I look at Sarah Ferguson, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today. So here is this chart for today, set for noon in New York on Thursday, September the 25th. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So as far as what is happening today, we still have that grand trine in air signs that I was talking about yesterday. Perhaps I went on about it rather too much. So, the sun is still trine Uranus, it's still trine Pluto. Okay, not as exact as it was yesterday, but it's still a major feature of the day. And so what I said about that grand trine, I would repeat for today. I mean, it's quite an exciting combination, an exciting configuration. Things are moving. It is a grand trine in air signs, so that might work at the realm of sort of ideas and thoughts, and it's about perhaps what we say. And additionally, we have to think about Uranus and Pluto. Uranus and Pluto are these outer planets, discovered planets, and they may represent something going on in the universe that we don't fully understand. And maybe with the sun making this grand trine, we can bring things down to earth, concepts that are difficult to understand, that might be revolutionary and explosive. We can perhaps make them real, or if we can't make them real, we can perhaps see them becoming real, all around us. And while all this is going on, we have things going on in Scorpio. Like yesterday, we have the moon in Scorpio, we have the Mars in Scorpio. So at noon New York time, the moon is at 15 degrees 23 Scorpio. So that means that the moon is leaving the via combustor. The last half of Scorpio for the moon is perhaps not as difficult as the first part. In the first part of the Scorpio, the moon is in the via combustor, and so it can be relatively unstable, and things can just happen that we weren't expecting, as I was talking about yesterday. But now, moon in late Scorpio, there's maybe not so much going on. The moon is moving towards a trine with Jupiter, a trine with Saturn, and perhaps towards the end of the day we're starting to get an almost sort of grand trine in water feel, and that moves into tomorrow. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because Jupiter and Saturn are starting to make a trine aspect. Of course, it's very slow, and it's certainly not going to be there right now. And as far as how this grand trine aspect progresses, we have to remember that Jupiter does go retrograde in November. So this year this Jupiter trine Saturn aspect doesn't come together, but tomorrow there might be a grand trine in water feel, and I'll be talking about that in my in my reading for Friday, maybe even today a little bit, because you've got Moon in Scorpio, Jupiter in Cancer, Saturn in Pisces, but it's probably going to be, fairly mild. So yeah, so we've got Moon and Mars in Scorpio. They're not really making a conjunction anymore. Okay, they're in the same sign, but it's not as intense as it was yesterday. And so, the Moon is eventually going to make a trine to Jupiter, trine to Saturn, but that doesn't happen today. And so today, Thursday, it just might feel that there's not quite so much going on. And the main aspect is a semi-square between Venus and Jupiter. So there's Venus at 7 degrees Virgo, 45 degree, making a 45-degree aspect to Jupiter. And this aspect, well, would have been exact sort of yesterday, Wednesday evening, if you're in the Americas, I think. But whether it's yesterday or today, Thursday, that Venus semi-square Jupiter, it can be somewhat indulgent. I mean, the two benefics making a hard aspect to one another, there's a possibility of overdoing things. But if you're taking the German approach, whether it's sort of Ebertin or Witter in the Hamburg school, they would probably see the 45-degree aspect as just being an aspect. And Venus and Jupiter in aspect, that's good. I mean, Venus and Jupiter are benefics, and so it might be a time for generosity and people doing good things. It might be. On the other hand, Venus is in Virgo, Jupiter is in Cancer, so there's a bit of a contradiction there. Venus in Virgo can be self-interested, as we'll be observing with Sarah Ferguson. She has Venus in Virgo, and her apology to Epstein quite possibly had a lot to do with money. And she's not someone she wanted to fall out with. Venus and Virgo, always thinking about herself. I mean, that is a way of looking at Venus and Virgo. My apologies if you have Venus and Virgo. Venus and Virgo can work in many different ways. But, Venus and Virgo plays Jupiter in Cancer. Jupiter in Cancer is exalted. So perhaps with Venus and Jupiter, given their signs, very different energies. And so maybe that semi-square is somewhat uncomfortable. On one hand, perhaps trying to be generous, but on the other hand, we are thinking about ourselves and our own vital interests. And we mustn't forget that Venus is in Virgo. Now, that is the picture for New York at noon on Thursday. And switching to Sydney, Australia, the moon is just earlier in the sign. And the moon is at sort of 8 degrees Scorpio, kind of making a sextile to Venus, which is fairly pleasant. I mean, it's not a dramatic aspect. And if you are in Australasia, well, the moon is going to be in the Via Combusta for most of the day, certainly until the evening. And so maybe if you're in Australasia, things might be a little less stable. That grand trine in air signs is a little bit closer. So there may be more action than if you're in the Americas, but the overall themes are the same. Regardless of regardless of what your time zone is. And then the heliocentric view. Here it is. Venus is now making an opposition to Pluto. You see, heliocentrically, Venus has just gone into Leo, making an opposition to Pluto in Aquarius. And so Venus opposition Pluto, well, it's not unusual. Venus and Mercury are both planets heliocentrically that move quite quickly. And so Venus opposition Pluto, you could say the normal stuff about Venus opposition Pluto, being perhaps jealous of certain relationships that one is in, and wanting perhaps to own someone. Maybe that might be a way that Venus opposition Pluto works, and perhaps being very aware of what people are doing and what people have, what we don't have. May not just be us. It just may be that there may be a sort of a jealous environment in which we're we're living. But Venus is a fast mover. I wouldn't want to overestimate the importance of Venus opposition Pluto. Venus is also making a trine to Neptune, and perhaps we should be focusing on Venus trine Neptune rather than Venus opposition Pluto. Venus trine Neptune, you could say, is more benign. It's more tolerant and accepting, and there could be a certain spirituality to Venus trine Neptune, just being able to sort of tune into things in a way that is sort of quite natural. And there could be a feeling of a sort of spiritual oneness with something if we're prepared to look for it. And now it's time for the 12 signs. Now, there is not a great deal going on today, and I'm hoping that my forecasts for the 12 signs will be relatively brief. I mean, there aren't any lunar aspects of note, and a lot of what's happening today is kind of like yesterday, except less so. So anyway, let's see what we find in terms of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Thursday, September the 25th, 2025. Aries. The moon continues to move through Scorpio. And maybe you're getting used to the fact that the moon is moving through Scorpio. It was perhaps, a bit of a shock to the system when the moon went into Scorpio, yesterday. And the reason it might have been a shock to the system is because you were aware that Mars had changed signs, that Mars, your ruler, was, out of Libra into Scorpio. Then the moon made a conjunction to Mars, and now the moon is very much sort of in Scorpio. And so that things have changed, and that it's a time when you perhaps can't be your normal self, where you have to find different ways of functioning. And it's not just the fact that Mars is in Scorpio. It's happening at a time when there are no planets in fire signs, unless you count Neptune and Chiron. And being an Aries, you thrive off the fire element. And so with this lack of fire, you might feel a lack of support, at least in the first instance. And that really is about you not being able to function in the normal way and having to do things differently. And I talked about the grand trine in air signs, and the grand trine in air signs still very much in existence. And perhaps you need to think about air as a way of functioning rather than fire. And perhaps it is about the mind and what your mind is telling you. And rather than acting, taking the initiative, in a physical way, Aries, maybe it's about talking, telling people what's on your mind and suggesting an idea rather than necessarily seeing it through. And this is not the normal Aries approach, but you have to understand the way things are working, the way things are. And if one wants to get sort of all Jungian about it, there is a view that fire, according to Jung, fire and earth are on the irrational axis, and air and water are on the rational axis. So at the moment you could argue that there is a certain emphasis on air and water, with that Scorpio and the grand trine, and plus the grand trine in air signs. So the emphasis is on sort of rationality rather than the sort of irrational. And rationality and irrationality, they're concepts that perhaps aren't quite the same as perhaps we understand them in the sort of modern day. And what one means by rationality, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not an expert on Jung, but rationality is about working things out using our brain and our heart, not necessarily considering the external environment, perhaps not what we touch, not how we put things together. It's just our mind and our heart working out what is right. And we kind of work out what is right for ourselves. And it's a process. And we have to think it through and feel it through. And it's this weird way in which the air signs and the water signs have a congruence. And I probably need to think about this more, probably need to do a whole video on it, but they do have this congruence, and it's almost like a sort of a moral congruence. And so, Aries, take the time to work out what is right, and it might be irritating because you'd like to be moving things forward quickly, but that's not the right approach. And do give everything consideration, and I at the same time understand that right now, Aries, you are impatient. You want things to happen, and you feel a certain nervousness, but you can address that by listening to your feelings and talking about perhaps what is upsetting you. I mean, I'm not saying anything is upsetting you, by the way, but if something is bothering you, talk about it. I know conversation is boring; it doesn't necessarily go anywhere. But right now, conversation, might be the way forward, and you might, in the end, if you talk enough, be able to make some intellectual connections, which give you a sense of where you should be going, how you should be handling things. Maybe that's not what you wanted to hear, but I think that's my broad understanding of what is happening at the moment. And as far as other people are concerned, don't forget the Sun is in Libra. It's in your opposite sign. It's making a trine to Uranus. It's trine to Pluto. So it's possible that if you are feeling that things are boring, you're perhaps used to taking initiative, it maybe someone else can provide the excitement. And so give them a chance. Listen to what they're saying. Listen to what they're suggesting. And it doesn't always have to be under sort of your initiative. Of course, many Arians kind of expect other people to take the initiative. It's a bit boring if you're an Aries, always being the one having to make the suggestions. Maybe you should listen to another person's suggestions and just give them a chance. Taurus. Not a great deal happening today, though one aspect we do have is Venus semi-square Jupiter. We also have Venus biquintile Pluto. So Venus semi-square Jupiter is a sort of a mixed aspect. It depends on how you see it. Now, you could be very positive about Venus semi-square Jupiter. If you take the view that every hard aspect, whether it's a conjunction, a square, opposition, semi-square, sesquiquadrate, every hard aspect is just a connection. It brings two principles together. And so Venus semi-square Jupiter could, in fact, make you lucky. Simple as that. And, Jupiter is in Cancer. It's not going retrograde in its exaltation. And so Venus semi-square Jupiter may allow you to seize the opportunity, to see what is possible. And if you're doing something that is right for you, then I think you will be lucky. But the question is, is it right for you? I mean, that's always a problem. So ask yourself, what is the right approach for you? And if you are able to get it right and you're acting in accordance with your own destiny, then I think that Venus semi-square Jupiter is going to work for you. And you have to be slightly detached, and you don't want to be thinking too much about your own selfish interests. I mean, you could. I mean, Venus is in Virgo, like it or not. And Venus in Virgo can be rather transactional. I'm not saying that you are transactional, but Sometimes you could be. In terms of, for example, every social contact, you might be thinking, well, who's winning, who's losing, how can I benefit from this exchange? I mean, I know that's not very nice, but sometimes we have to be transactional. But if you're too transactional, if you're thinking too much about your short-term interests and not enough about the broader picture, then I can't see how that Venus semi-square Jupiter is going to work for you. In fact, it might make things difficult. So really do, Taurus, think about where things are going to be going. And if you're doing things right, then I think that you should be quite pretty fortunate. And I think that this will also be expressed in how you communicate. Venus and Jupiter are both on the Mercury-Mars midpoint, or aspecting the Mercury-Mars midpoint, and so that sort of tells us something about how Venus and Jupiter is working, where it's most likely to express itself, and it could express itself in what you say and how you get your way. And again, this goes back to, what are you asking for? Are you asking for something that's reasonable, that's in accordance with your purpose and your destiny and what you should be doing now? Destiny changes. What your destiny, say, next year may be different from from this year. I mean, you can have a destiny on a particular day. September the 12th, 2025 might have its own destiny for you, and that might be different from tomorrow, which is September the 26th. So I think the key to whether or not it's a good or a bad day does depend on how you handle that Venus semi-square Jupiter. And if you find yourself being overindulgent, which you could, I don't think that's going to be anything that you should be proud of. You could take something too far. It could be money, could be just emotional overindulgence. All of that is possible, but it needn't happen. And so, try to be mature and also to just evaluate yourself, and that is, the best way of doing it. And also, Venus is biquintile Pluto, and with Venus biquintile Pluto, if you're not happy with the way things are going, if you want change, you can create change, and it's something you have to work on. Venus biquintile Pluto, they're 144 degrees apart, and so it's something you have to put into action through, well, your willpower. Don't underestimate your willpower. So if you're not happy about something, you believe that things should be going in a particular direction, and they're not going in that direction, then I think, Taurus, you can make the change. Gemini. Like yesterday, we have a grand trine in our signs. So I would basically suggest you just continue taking advantage of that grand trine. I hope you found it yesterday. I hope it's working for you. If you missed it, then perhaps you have another chance. The sun is still trine Pluto. The sun is still trine Uranus. And so it's possible, likely, that things are running smoothly, and if you're doing something that you enjoy, that you're sincerely enjoying it, and I'm not talking about idle pleasure here, and if you're doing something that you really enjoy, then one thing can lead to another, and they can just be a general sort of whirlwind of action. Okay, a lot of that action might be mental, taking place at the realm of ideas, but there's nothing wrong with ideas. And of course, you're a Gemini. I'm a Gemini. At least I've got my sun in Gemini. And so, once one idea can lead on to another idea, and this can create a fusion of ideas with things moving very quickly, and there being a sort of a rapid succession of ideas, and that can feel incredibly positive and dynamic. And so do keep going with it, and don't forget, Gemini, your fundamental positivity. Now, as a Gemini, you can be negative. You can overthink things. You can think that it's just not going to happen. It's all impossible, and even if it does happen, what's the point? I mean, that can be the Gemini line of thinking, but there's no need for that line of thinking at the moment. I think at the moment, Gemini, you can move beyond all of this and see something, beyond yourself. And yeah, you can be in touch with the beyond, because the Sun is aspecting Uranus, it's aspecting Pluto. Uranus and Pluto, these transpersonal planets, which can just give you a glimpse of something which is very different and very special, and perhaps it's a glimpse of a future as well. Okay, not a future that you can immediately experience, but you can be part of that future. And so that's probably the best way of dealing with today's energies. Do focus on that grand trine on that grand trine in air signs. Though, don't forget that the moon is in Scorpio, Mars is in Scorpio, and while it's nice to be inspirational and it's to take advantage of the power of the universe, don't be lazy. Don't leave things to chance. There are some things you have to pay attention to. You don't necessarily want to pay attention to them, but if you pay attention to them now, it would make things a lot easier for you sort of later on. So, be aware of your surroundings, and if something doesn't look right and seems to be falling apart or in a state of disrepair or disarray, then do something about it. It's just a minor diversion. It doesn't take away from the broader power and inspiration of today. Cancer. Moon still moving through Scorpio, and the moon is moving through into the last half of Scorpio, and generally speaking, the last half of Scorpio is sort of easier than the first half. And moon in Scorpio, well, you don't really have a problem with moon in Scorpio, because Scorpio is a water sign, and so it's an energy that you're pretty comfortable with. And with the last half of Scorpio, you're kind of getting into your stride. And additionally, the moon in late Scorpio is starting to make a trine to Jupiter and a trine to Saturn. Now, those trines do not become exact until tomorrow, but you may be feeling them. I don't think other people are particularly going to feel them, but being a Cancerian, you're more sensitive perhaps than others to sort of changing planetary and lunar energies, and so you can kind of naturally drift from sort of one state to another, and you're not going to get too caught up in the past, and that which way things are moving, with the moon moving towards Jupiter and Saturn. And Jupiter and Saturn as a pair are two planets very much connected with time. Jupiter and Saturn are the rulers of time, the chronocrators, and time changes, and we have got a Jupiter-Saturn trine coming up. It's not exact until next year, 2026, but perhaps you're preparing for it, and you can start to align yourself with the future in a gentle sort of Cancerian kind of way. You're not revealing much. You're not even thinking about it much. There's some things, Cancer, that you just know, that you're just aware of, and it's all very obvious. And right now, there's probably nothing that has to be talked about. You have an idea, not even an idea. That's the wrong word, because it's more about a feeling. You have a feeling about the way things are going to go, and it makes sense to you. But does it make sense to anyone else? Maybe not yet, because I think, to an extent, you are ahead of the pack. You're just seeing things that other people don't understand at the moment, and perhaps you can just work on it and develop it in your mind. Make some notes, make some plans, but nothing really has to be done at the moment. And perhaps your main priority at the moment, right now, should be just enjoying yourself, taking advantage of your insights, certainly your emotional insights, and over the next day or two, it's possible that you can share the way you feel with other people, maybe today as well. So the moon is slowly moving towards a trine of Saturn. Okay, it's got a long time to go, certainly not going to happen today, but that might mean that you're finding it just easier to get on with certain people, and perhaps there's less struggle than there was yesterday, and things are less complicated, and that perhaps other people are less complicated, and that is certainly going to make things easier. Leo, you possibly are aware of differences, how other people may be different from you despite your best efforts. Leo is a sign which is friendly and good-natured, and you often enjoy people's company, but I think at the moment you're very aware of other people's limitations, and at the same time you might be aware of your own short-term limitations. There's only so much you want to give away, and there's only so much you want to do, and it's probably temporary. But when it comes to other people and trying to get on with them, I don't think you're really in the mood for putting yourself out. And one reason for this is that your efforts to be friendly and constructive, it just may feel that you're being rebuffed, and you absolutely should not worry about it. This is something short term. By and large, the sun, don't forget, is in Libra, and Libra is a very sociable sign, and at the same time, you're very good at talking to people, telling everyone what's on your mind, and being able to articulate your ideas in general at the moment. But it's just today things might not be working, and your attempts to get in contact with other people just may not work out. And so perhaps, Leo, it's a time to be quite self-sufficient, and don't forget, it is a day when, at least on paper, not much is going on, really. And so perhaps you should just accept that, do what feels comfortable. And I think that things, by and large, are probably going to be more stable than they were yesterday. And so if you can do that, then I think that you will be fine. And at the same time, don't limit your options. That grand trine in air signs that I was talking about, Sun trine Uranus, Sun trine Jupiter, it's still in operation. And that might mean that information is coming your way. Not just information, knowledge. You're being told things, and you're being told things that could be quite high level, quite cosmic. And the question is, what is telling you? Well, it might be that through a keen observation of other people, even if you're not getting on with them very well, but if you keenly observe them, then you might get some insights. But it might also be that insights come from nowhere. Though, I think other people shouldn't be entirely underestimated. I think it's going to be difficult to get close to people. I think that's true. But at the same time, you can benefit through contact with them, provided nothing is at stake, provided it's contact at a distance. And you can look at their behavior, you can look at what they're saying, and in the process, you can get some insights, and maybe short term you want to keep those insights to yourself. But information is available, and information is coming your way thick and fast from many different sources, and perhaps your task is to bring it all together. It might not be immediately easy to bring things together, and you may have to wait until the moon goes into Sagittarius for things to really start to click. But for the moment, you can make your observations. It might not make much sense, but I think soon enough it will start to make a lot more sense. Virgo. We have a situation which is pretty similar to yesterday. I don't think there's a lot of difference between yesterday and today. Moon is still in Scorpio. There's still a grand trine in air signs, and I would urge you to continue to make the most of this grand trine. I mean, it's a grand trine that you should regard as being useful. You have ideas, perhaps ideas that have existed for a long time, and you want to put these put these ideas into practice, make them real. But sometimes you can sort of worry about whether these ideas are going anywhere, and perhaps you're being slightly too careful, or you have been slightly too careful and slightly too cautious. And if you want to make real progress, I'm not just talking about today, I'm talking about over the next few years, something probably has to change. You've got the basics there, it's all in order, the fundamentals are there, but there's something else that's needed. And maybe this grand trine between the Sun, Uranus and Pluto is giving you what is needed. This grand trine is not going to repeat once it goes out of orb. It won't repeat for another year. There will be another grand trine involving Sun, Uranus and Pluto at the end of September 2026. But if you can make the most of this grand trine and think about what it's telling you, your ideas about yourself and your direction are, they could be more ambitious and they could be more exciting, and more than that, they could be in accord with the future. And you do want to align yourself to the future and to the challenges of the future and the drama of the future. And you can see it all if you open your eyes with this grand trine involving particularly Uranus. I think Uranus is the key planet here, because Uranus is in Gemini. Uranus is in a high profile part of your chart, connected with ambition, and it's telling you that there needs to be change, there needs to be a shake-up. You need to look at what was important to you, what was important to your ego development, and rework it. And that process of reworking is not just about now, it's about, it moves into next year, because Uranus does briefly move out of Gemini, but it will go back into Gemini, and after next year it will stay in Gemini for 5, 6, 7, I don't know, off the top of my head, 5 or 6 years, 6 years, whatever. And so perhaps this grand trine is a time when you can really get an understanding of how you should be aligning yourself to the future. And in general, Virgo, I think that you are pretty optimistic right now. You are seeing possibilities, and these are possibilities that you can talk about and articulate. And it's not just about you, it's also about possibilities in other people's lives. And some people are perhaps feeling negative, they feel there are no prospects, they can't work out what their next move should be, and maybe, Virgo, you can help them. And that would be a good thing to do. And if you can help someone else to feel good about themselves, then you will get positive feedback, and that should boost your good fortune. Libra. Venus is making a semi-square to Jupiter, and this aspect might be important. And the reason it's important, or might be important, well, it's because there's not much going on today astrologically. I mean, if I sort of work out, what are the two aspects that are exact today? Well, there's Venus semi-square Jupiter and there's Venus biquintile Pluto. And all things being equal, a semi-square is stronger than a biquintile in my experience. And Venus semi-square Jupiter, we can look at it in several ways. Now, Venus semi-square Jupiter might mean that you are tempted to take something too far. There could be a feeling of exaggeration with Venus semi-square Jupiter. You get into something and you take it further and you take it a bit further, and in the end you don't know when to stop. And if you don't know when to stop, well, there could be unfortunate results, perhaps relating to money, or it could be the way you respond to other people. You could respond to other people in an exaggerated way. So that's a negative way of looking at Venus semi-square Jupiter. On the other hand, Jupiter is the planet of good fortune, and it is in Cancer. And so this Venus semi-square Jupiter can be fortunate for you, provided you handle it in the right way. And I was giving Taurus a similar message, because Taurus, of course, like Libra, has Venus as its ruler. And the way I see this Venus semi-square Jupiter is saying, well, Jupiter can be lucky if it's handled in the right way. I mean, well, you don't handle Jupiter. That's not what you do with Jupiter. Jupiter has an idea. Jupiter has an idea about what you should be doing, how you should be utilizing the opportunities placed before you. And if you do things which are in accordance with yourself and the fundamental you, whatever that fundamental you is, well, what can go wrong? And Jupiter, additionally, Jupiter, is in your 10th house, in your. If we take a whole sign chart, we put Libra as the ascendant, Jupiter's in the 10th, and that might say something about your career or your ambitions. And that Venus semi-square Jupiter could bring you out of your shell. Perhaps you'd been a little too negative, a little too sort of introspective, and Jupiter comes along and says, hold on, you're doing something, you've got to do something, you've got to take advantage of everything that's around you, you've got to do more. So if you find that something is pushing you, something real, something wholesome, it's pushing you to action, then Libra, listen to the message, because Venus, that might be just Jupiter kind of telling you, what you should be doing. And at the same time, you're able to articulate what's on your mind, and you can articulate yourself with considerable power, and you are going to be helped by Jupiter, because Venus is making a semi-square to Jupiter, and additionally both Venus and Jupiter are aspecting the Mercury-Mars midpoint. And so, you think about that Mercury-Mars combination. It's about communication, it's about talking, it's about thinking, but it's also about talking in a way that is energetic. Now, that doesn't mean that you should just talk for the sake of it. It's about talking about things that are important to you, and you perhaps have an urgency to you, or you can have an urgency to you, helped by that Venus semi-square Jupiter. And once people realize that something does matter to you, they're likely to give way, or perhaps give you what you want. And don't underestimate your own power. There is a biquintile between Venus and Pluto. So this is a connection you can make. So through your willpower, if you want to make changes, if you're not happy with the way things are, if you want to create some kind of transformation, then I think that Venus biquintile Pluto will firstly allow you to get the idea of transformation, give you a vision of how you like things to be, and then you can turn theory into practice. Scorpio. There is a continuation, in a way, of yesterday, Wednesday. We still have the Moon and Mars in your sign, and that might be all we have to say. I mean, Mars is in Scorpio. There will be another time, in a month's time, when the Moon will be in Scorpio and when there will be a Moon-Mars conjunction in Scorpio. So if you miss this Moon-Mars conjunction in Scorpio, well, it will happen in about a month's time. Of course, 2 months' time, Mars will be in Sagittarius, so that will have gone. But do think about today, and the Moon is out of the Via Combustor, or moving out of the Via Combustor, and so maybe things are going to be sort of more stable than they were yesterday, and sort of less dramatic, but at the same time, Moon and Mars are still in Scorpio, and so Scorpio is your sign, and it's very much about what you want and your desires, and if there is something you want, you can certainly get it, or at least you've got a good chance of getting it, provided you're reasonable. And additionally, don't forget, Mars is still making a square to Pluto, and Mars square Pluto, you can be negative about Mars square Pluto. It can be a sort of quite a power-hungry aspect, and it can be quite self-centered and self-focused. But there is a positive way of looking at it. Pluto gives you power. Pluto is a planet, Scorpio, that you have a familiarity with. As you know, if you've been watching these videos, I don't regard Pluto as being the ruler of Scorpio, but I'm absolutely prepared to accept that Pluto has an association with Scorpio. So with Mars square Pluto, I think that does make you powerful, with these two Scorpio-related planets coming together in aspect. Even though it's a square aspect, I think that can be quite motivating. Although, as far as other people are concerned, it could be too much of a good thing. Maybe you'll just be too into yourself. There's a temptation for you to be too into yourself, but I don't think that has to be. I think that if you make a special effort to be reasonable, but also to look after your own best interests, then I think that you'll be fine. And also, Scorpio, if you feel that things aren't going your way, if you feel that something is stuck, then you have the capacity to create change. It's really very easy. Easy for you. So if you have an idea about the way things should be, and indeed, if you believe that one thing needs to be removed to make way for another, well, yeah, you can do that. Although you have to think about, is that really the right thing to do? You could, in your own way, cause a lot of destruction. But maybe destruction is needed sometimes, perhaps as every Scorpio knows. If you want to move to the future, you have to kind of destroy the past. And that is a scorpionic way of looking at the world. But you just don't want to exaggerate. You don't want to just destroy for the sake of it. And ideally, it's not about destruction. It's about transformation. And you just have to get the balance right. And that's something that I'm fairly confident you can get the balance right. Provided you're honest with yourself and you're not too intense. Today is not as intense as yesterday, and so perhaps you have the capacity for being reasonable enough. Sagittarius. Not a great deal has changed compared with yesterday, and I think that when I did your chart for yesterday, I was rather non-committal. I don't think I said anything in particular. I don't think I gave a particularly good reading for Sagittarius yesterday. When I say a good reading, I mean not as in good or bad for you. I don't think I gave a particularly effective reading. I didn't really get to the heart of the matter. At least that's how it felt. But maybe that was because there wasn't a heart to the matter. Maybe it was all a bit sort of vague and up in the air, and I kind of have to say the same thing for today, because not a great deal has changed. There's still a lot of stuff in Scorpio. There's still a grand trine in air, but does this affect you directly? Well, not really. On the other hand, there is a semi-square between Venus and Jupiter, and this semi-square, well, it might have been exact yesterday evening if you're in the Americas, but it lasts over the course of Wednesday, Thursday. So I think we can still talk about this Venus semi-square Jupiter, and that means that Venus is semi-square Jupiter, which Jupiter represents you because it's your ruler. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, and so you could argue that Venus is challenging you. And so what does Venus represent? I mean, Venus might represent self-interest. Now, that might not sound like a particularly sort of regular way of looking at Venus. We look at Venus perhaps, in terms of relationships and how you sort of get on with other people. These are ways in which you can look at Venus, or you can look at it in terms of art. But we shouldn't forget that Venus is in Virgo, and Venus in Virgo can be self-interested, especially in the Sagittarian chart. And you might not want to be self-interested. You're beyond all of that. You're at another level, and it just seems so demeaning to be transactional, to be thinking about what is good for you, and it just doesn't seem right. But there's a time and a place for everything, and if you feel a tinge of self-interest, if you feel that you do have to look after yourself, perhaps because of another person's behavior, you may observe someone else being selfish, and then you might be thinking, well, hold on, if other people are being selfish, well, you've got to be selfish yourself. It's a matter of survival. Or it could be a prompting, someone telling you to get yourself together, someone encouraging you to be more self-interested. Well, it could be me telling you that you should be more self-interested, but then I'm not Venus in Virgo. It would be more likely to be a woman, because Venus is a female planet. And so that might be how Venus semi-square Jupiter is working. I think that possibly is healthier than it sounds, and maybe you actually need other people to challenge you, to give you that spark, because that spark might not be there for you. There might be just something missing, and that's perhaps what I've been trying to articulate in my reading, not just for today but for yesterday. There is something missing that you haven't got in yourself, and maybe you have to find it from outside, and that might mean making some effort to observe other people's behavior, and not just people's behavior, but perhaps what people are telling you. And so a bit of selfishness, Sagittarius, but not too much selfishness, might be in your best interests, and not just in your financial best interest. Might strangely be in your, well, I won't say spiritual best interest, but it might be just in the interests of you and your direction in life at this moment. Capricorn, just carry on. I mean, yesterday was, I hope, a reasonably okay day, and today is arguably just a continuation. So I don't think there's any need to change. And of course, this is a problem of doing daily horoscopes. Is that it would be nice if one day was discrete. That's why perhaps I like to use the I Ching, because with the I Ching I can say, well, this is what this day is like, and I can categorize it according to a particular hexagram, and then the next day new hexagram. But with astrology, one thing merges into another, and yesterday we had a lot of stuff in Scorpio. We've still got a lot of stuff in Scorpio, and we've still got a sort of grand trine in air signs. And so that's why I'm suggesting that you should just sort of carry on. And I think that the grand trine in air signs in particular, I think is something you need to continue to use. And you need to be taking things to new levels as far as you possibly can, and to just be aware of, everything is possible. The sun in Libra, sun in a cardinal sign, making a trine to Pluto, making a trine to Uranus, that does mean that you can continue to make changes to the way you maybe run your life, or make the most of the various routines that you have. But routines are not static. I think that is an important message with this grand trine. You don't have to be tied to doing things always in the same way at the same time of day, and people get used to you. People get used to you doing things in a particular way, so they don't like it when you make change. And you might think that it's easiest to just do what other people want, do what other people expect. But it is not a time to be just meekly fitting in with other people's expectations. And expectations can last for a long time. It can last for years. If you've been doing the same thing in the same way for years and years and years, well, people will expect you to continue. And because of that expectation, you won't change. And then it'll in the end be too late. So if you do want to make changes, if you want to upset other people's expectations with this grand trine in air signs, I think you can. And whatever's going on, it will be expected. You will know how you are influencing other people. You are quite sensitive at the moment, and that's because we've got Moon and Mars in Scorpio, and the Moon is actually slowly moving towards a trine to Saturn. Now that Moon trine Saturn, it's 13 degrees away, but from a whole sign perspective, Moon in Scorpio playing Saturn in Pisces, it's starting to come in, and the Moon is also making a trine to Jupiter, and so you kind of got a grand trine in water signs, and this grand trine in water signs does give you a certain sensitivity, in a social sense and in an interpersonal sense. So whatever you're doing, you know how people are responding, and I don't think there'll be any surprises. And so I think that is something quite fortunate, and that you should make the most of. You are someone who is aware at the moment. It's difficult for everyone to be aware, because there is this the grand trine in air signs. Some people can handle it, some people can't, and it's the Uranus Pluto are these two transpersonal planets that are complicating things, but they're making their influence felt quickly, and it's difficult to keep track, but you're able to keep track, and you're able to keep track of how this grand trine is influencing everyone. And so that does perhaps give you the advantage. Additionally, we do have a semi-square between Venus and Jupiter, and this Venus semi-square Jupiter, it's possibly a minor aspect. I don't regard semi-squares as being minor in themselves, but I'm not convinced it's going to have a huge impact on you. But it could be about a challenge. Perhaps you had made, or you're in the process of making a decision about what you're going to do next. And it might be an informed decision, and also quite an inspired decision. And you kind of think you're finalizing on something, and then you get some feedback, or you notice another person's response, and that does give you pause for thought, and you see a different approach, something that is different from the way you'd imagined it all, and your first impulse is to say, no, that's not what you want to do. It's just too complicated to integrate anything new. But if you actually look at what people are doing and why people are doing it, why people are making the suggestions that they're making, and you might start to realize that you're being helped in some way. The moon is making a trine to Jupiter, it's making a trine to Saturn, and Venus is making a semi-square to Jupiter, and all of this together indicates that you don't have to work everything out on your own, and you shouldn't believe that your conclusions, or the things you are in the process of concluding, that you've necessarily got it 100% right, and a few last minute changes could be in order. And so don't feel everything is written in stone, not quite yet. Aquarius. The grand trine in air signs is still there, and of course that affects Aquarius. Got Pluto in your sign, and so things are still moving, and you're able to perhaps see how things could change. They don't have to be stuck. You don't have to be stuck, and perhaps you're being given just lots of insights into the future. And the important thing is to be able to make sense of this future and to be prepared for this future. And I think that that is something that you can do, and you're being helped. That is the key point. So at a logical level, you might feel that you haven't got a clue what's going to happen next. But if you can sort of move beyond that logic and just be open to just being told, and how do you tell the future? Well, telling the future can just be about observing your surroundings. I think it was H.G. Wells, who wrote The War of the Worlds and The Time Machine. I think he talked about the archaeology of the future, and it's a kind of amazing idea, the archaeology of the future. And it's the idea that the future kind of leaves things in the past. So you can see the relics of the future in the present, and you look at these relics, and it's kind of a really weird idea, relics of the future. And by looking at these relics, you can start to project yourself forward into the future and to understand how this future is starting to develop. So perhaps it's just about looking at the signs of the times, and you see something, it seems pretty minor, some small change, but that is the beginning. That is telling you how it's all going to be, how it's going to all look very soon. And of course, Aquarius is a very future-orientated sign. It should be a future-orientated sign, especially now that Pluto is in your sign, and it's trine Uranus. And like yesterday, Mars is still in Scorpio. The moon is in Scorpio. So Aquarius, it's certainly not a time to be lazy. You don't want to be lazy, and you do feel motivated, and you're just not very comfortable with the status quo. And if you want to create change at the moment, I think you very much can. If you don't like the way things are going, you can take a stand. You can perhaps do something unexpected. You can upset other people's expectations, and so you can generally sort of move things forward in a way that could be very effective. It could even be spectacular. Pisces. Not a lot has changed compared to yesterday. We've still got stuff in Scorpio, still got Moon and Mars in Scorpio. We've still got a grand trine in air signs. And we do have a semi-square between Venus and Jupiter. So as far as the Scorpio planets are concerned, keep being inspired, keep tuning into your feelings, because your feelings are, the feelings are not something sort of just introspective and brooding. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about you sort of feeling your way forward and feeling the world around you, picking up on other people's feelings, and through that you can kind of transcend these feelings. You can know where all these feelings are going. So it's not just a passive process. I mean, and perhaps it's because you're a water sign, and Pisceans can use their feelings to feel out the future. And there is a sense of the future today with this grand trine in air signs, Sun, Uranus, Pluto, but it also links with those Scorpio planets. And so you can sort of move beyond yourself and move beyond your feelings, other people's feelings, to just understand where this emotional network is going. And also Venus semi-square Jupiter. The Venus semi-square Jupiter could be challenging, and it might be that you thought everything was under control. Jupiter in Cancer, great placement for Jupiter in its exaltation, and of course Jupiter is your ruler, and that is about you being increasingly comfortable, I hope, with who you are and what you're doing, and perhaps being able to enjoy yourself, and and that's all well and good. But Venus semi-square Jupiter might be someone raising questions, someone attracting your attention, and it's not necessarily easy. Now, they might be attracting your attention for good reason. So perhaps you might be so caught up in yourself that you're not thinking about the interpersonal dimension. And so Venus semi-square Jupiter could be about incorporating another person in whatever you're doing and trying to be more inclusive on a positive note. Now, it could be that Venus in Virgo represents something or someone that isn't necessarily desirable. Venus in Virgo, well, Venus is fallen in Virgo because it's exalted in Pisces. So Venus may represent a person who is unhelpful, a person who challenges what you're doing, but not in a constructive way. They're just trying to make you feel self-conscious, trying to make you feel guilty. And you should be able to recognize that. And so always ask yourself, what is the other person's motivation? Are they genuinely interested in what you're doing? Do they want to become part of what you're doing? Or are they just trying to undermine what you're doing? Are they just thinking about themselves and their own needs? Well, in that case, you need to be aware of the situation, and you need to stand up for yourself. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 16, which is contentment. Greg Winkup calls this hexagram contentment. The Wilhelm translation, it calls it enthusiasm. And it's interesting, sort of comparing sort of Wilhelm and Winkup, because Winkup is quite negative about this hexagram, at least in a broad sense, without looking at the individual lines, because the problem about contentment is it can lead to complacency. We can just assume that everything is going to be fine, or it's fine at the moment, might not be fine tomorrow, but who cares? Let's live for the moment, and let's not worry what's coming down the road. But with Wilhelm uses the word enthusiasm, and enthusiasm is seen as being a fortunate word, I think, by and large, in the English language. When you use the word enthusiasm. So you go from enthusiasm to contentment and to complacency. And do you call this? I don't think you can call this hexagram complacency. So there is a tendency here to live in the present and to make what you can of a present. That's perhaps what we're coming into today with. But there's still this awareness that things are not perfect. Contentment. It seems sort of non-committal. We have to be content. Let's be content for the moment. And we have some moving lines. In the I Ching, you can have a hexagram that might be unfortunate, but the moving lines can be fortunate, and vice versa. And the second line moves. And the second line moves is indicating that we are basically solid as a rock. And that might be our broad approach. And we are solid as a rock. And also, we are not complacent. That's what the I Ching is telling us. This is why the lines can give us a different message from the overall hexagram. We are very down to earth, and we are not sidetracked by illusion. And we realize that things are not necessarily good. And the Legge translation of the I Ching says of this line, far-seeking discrimination. So that seems to encompass quite a lot, sort of far-seeing discrimination. We're able to look at the future, and we're able to think about what matters in the future. And it is quite a futuristic day. If you've been reading, or listening to my forecast of the 12 signs, that's something I have been putting quite a lot of effort into describing. And we need to think about, what is going to happen next. Not all of it is going to be good. But at the same time, we don't want to worry about things needlessly. Remember, that's a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. There are all sorts of worries about what's going to happen, how bad things are going to be. So that's the meaning of the word discrimination. We've got to discriminate between the things that are important, the things that matter, and the things that, really, we don't need to worry about it too much. So we need to get it right. And then the fourth line moves, and the fourth line is actually encouraging us to be enthusiastic. In fact, it's okay to be enthusiastic. Remembering 16 in the Wilhelm translation is enthusiasm. It's okay. And the reason we need to be enthusiastic is because we need to inspire other people. Other people need inspiring, and we can be an inspiring force. So perhaps other people at first might seem not very confident. They might feel down. They might feel it's all hopeless, but we can cheer them up. Not just cheer them up. I mean, just cheering them up just for the sake of it, that doesn't do much. But we can actually encourage them, perhaps, to make the most of everything. And so we can be a real force for good here. And so it does, as you can see, involve sort of other people. And if you look at the hexagram this transitions to, it transitions to hexagram number 7, which is the army. And the army is a collective hexagram. It is about the group, and perhaps it's about leadership as well. And maybe it's telling us that we need to adopt a certain degree of leadership, but we need to ask ourselves, where is collective action required? Because, that is what the army is all about. Perhaps there is a problem or an opportunity that we need to take advantage of, but perhaps we can't take advantage of it on our own. And it's an opportunity that a lot of people could take advantage of. And that might be a way of doing it. Or it could, of course, when you're talking about armies, you could be talking about a threat, something that is a threat to all of us. And we know that things are not necessarily going to be great in the future. Remember what Legge said, far-seeing discrimination, we start to see a problem and we can act on that problem. But what do? Well, we need to take some kind of collective action. Other people need to be aware of it. They need to be told about it. They don't have to be afraid of it. But if whatever, forewarned or is forearmed, or whatever that saying is. And so that might be the way the army works. But don't forget, this is just a hexagram for today. This is just a reading for today. But I think there is some emphasis on the collective and your role in the collective, and I think that you can have quite a positive role. And I want to finish by looking at Sarah Ferguson. Yeah, my apologies if you're not interested in her. I'm not interested in her either, but she is in the news, and I don't have to really explain who she is. I mean, that's the advantage of looking at someone like Sarah Ferguson. Yeah, we know that she is married to Prince Andrew. We get a broad idea about her personality and her flaws, and she's been in the news sort of a huge amount. And so here is let's have a look at her horoscope. And of course, another thing about the royals, even if they're not born royal, they always have times of birth. You never get a royal or someone connected with a royal where we don't have a time of birth. I don't know why that is, but it just seems to always be the case. Even though these people are British, and unless they're twins, the time will not be on the birth certificate. Despite that, people associated with the royal family have times of birth, and that's another reason why it's worth looking at their charts as a learning exercise. So here is her chart. She's a Libran. Now I should just remind you what the problem was, why she's been in the news so much, and it all relates to emails. And so the way it works is that she had an association, she and her husband, or former husband, Andrew, had an association of Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, a lot of people have an association of Jeffrey Epstein, so that is not exactly unusual. And when these the allegations about Jeffrey Epstein, when it became clear about what Jeffrey Epstein had been doing, Sarah Ferguson, she put out this message in which she said, "I deeply regret that Jeffrey Epstein became involved in any way with me. I abhor whatever he was doing, and or whatever he was accused of doing, and that this was a gigantic error of judgment on my part. I am just so contrite I cannot say." So that was her public messaging, and which I think she gave this message out at the beginning of 2011, and then on April 26, 2011, she sent this email, and I don't think we have the full email, but we do have quotes from the email, and then which she wrote to Jeffrey Epstein, and she said, for example, "I know you feel hellaciously let down by me from what you were either told or read, and I must humbly apologize to you and your heart for that." Then she also said, "You have always been a steadfast, generous, and supreme friend to me and my family." And so that's what she was telling him privately, and now it's all got out, and charities don't want anything to do with her, and so it's naturally become sort of major news in the UK and beyond, because of course Jeffrey Epstein is involved. Certainly major news in the US as well. Now, here is her chart, and I don't find her chart particularly interesting. I really don't. It's just one of those, even though I have a time of birth. But what gets me, or what I think perhaps is significant about it. Well, firstly, she's Sun in Libra and Moon in Aries. And you can see Moon conjunct the South Node in Aries. And in a female chart, you probably should be looking at the moon more than the sun. And of course, well, she's kind of got a full moon chart here, but sort of her moon is in Aries. So this represents a woman who is perhaps assertive, who maybe acts first and thinks later, particularly as the moon is conjunct the south node. So the south node is, of course, represents the past, perhaps what one shouldn't be doing, what one should be avoiding. But there is that tendency for her to act first, think later. And the moon is kind of trine Jupiter in Sagittarius. So, when she first married Andrew, I don't think people had a particular problem with her, but she was involved in these televised, if I'm right in saying, she liked to play games, and there was something called It's a Royal Knockout, and I think it was incredibly embarrassing for the royal family, but the royals got involved with it. Was she involved with it? But was that in maybe that was in the 80s, late 80s, and it seemed a bit rather tacky, and but she seemed to be. I think the general view of Sarah Ferguson, if I remember rightly, from the 80s, she was seen as being fun and maybe a breath of fresh air. I'm just trying to remember. I didn't look it up before this video, and so I think that people didn't necessarily have a negative view of her right at the beginning, and people were perhaps picking up on her moon in Aries, moon trine Jupiter, and that seemed good enough, because it's a nice Jupiter. Jupiter's in its own sign, but that moon conjunct the south node can represent someone who is quite impulsive. They act first and think later. And additionally, she's got Venus in Virgo conjunct Pluto. So Venus in Virgo can be transactional, and she is thinking potentially about herself and her money. And this is a lot of what the Epstein thing has been about, because she has had financial problems throughout her life, and she's always been trying to raise money. However, in whatever way it takes. For example, providing paying for access to her husband, I think, so all sorts of ways in which he's been trying to raise money. And of course, Epstein, let's focus on what's important from her perspective. Is he's got loads of money. You wouldn't want to get rid of someone like Epstein, would you? So hence her emails to him. And I think, originally it was talking about £15,000, but there is a view that it's actually far more than that. We're talking about millions of pounds. And so Venus in Virgo cuts in. Venus in Virgo has to look after itself, and one doesn't sort of worry about these sort of subtleties, like what Jeffrey Epstein is up to. But she has Venus sextile Mercury. There isn't a sort of an ability to communicate. Venus, Mercury in Scorpio, being able to perhaps benefit from other people. But Venus in Virgo, Venus on the midheaven. So when you've got an angular planet which is also fallen, that planet can create some problems. And Venus conjunct Pluto is difficult. And then there is the question of her email. So she made this. She wrote this email on April the 26th, 2011, or rather, she sent the email. So here's I don't know what time she sent it. It's set for noon. So when she sent that email, Mercury, this email, which has caused so many problems, Mercury was opposition Saturn. So Mercury in Aries, she wants to take action. She's under pressure. She feels she needs to reach out to Epstein. Mercury in Aries. Let's just do it. Let's send the email. Mercury opposition Saturn. Well, that is the consequences of that email. But Mercury, having made the opposition to Saturn, it then makes a conjunction to Mars, and so Mercury was in a rather sort of difficult position, at least in terms of aspecting this sort of wide Mars-Saturn opposition. And What's kind of interesting about that chart is that Neptune is at 0 degrees Pisces. And you could argue that Neptune moving into Pisces in 2011, was when a lot of things unwound for Prince Andrew. I mean, his reputation was sort of falling apart at the seam. I mean, for quite a long time. His sort of sexual profligate, his sexuality and his sort of his various trysts and affairs and all of this kind of stuff. That's the sort of the stuff of which tabloid news have been sort of talking about, and sort of this was kind of when Spitting Image always used to do. You would have him in particular poses to sort of make the point, but so that Neptune's kind of interesting, because if you look at Prince Andrew's chart, Prince Andrew amazingly was born at the moment the sun went into Pisces. The sun at 0 degrees 0 minutes Pisces. And so that's a royal theme. Royals so often get born just at the moment something changes sign. Like, I think that Prince William has his sun at 0 degrees 6 minutes Cancer, really close. And I think Prince George's sun is born just before it's in Cancer, but just before it moves into Leo. So it is a constant theme in terms of royal births. So if you're ever trying to predict royal births, really look at the cusps, particularly with the sun, to predict when royals are going to be born. Maybe now you've noticed this trend, probably the trend will break. So you could say that when Neptune went into Pisces, that may be when things really started to fall apart for Prince Andrew. And of course now he's got Uranus square his sun. Uranus square his sun. So when she wrote this email, so Neptune had been on Prince Andrew's sun, and so that had perhaps been causing problems for her husband, and perhaps her destiny and his destiny are kind of linked. I mean, I don't know when they got divorced, even if they weren't sort of technically sort of married. And then might be a good idea to briefly look at her solar arc directions. So here are her solar arc directions at the moment, because it does seem that she's in a very difficult. She's really things are really really bad for her. Things are just keep getting worse. And as far as her solar arc directions, so remember she is 60. She's about to turn 66, so she's 65, just coming up for her 66th birthday. And so we would move all the planets 65, 66 degrees, something like that. And so, you can see it is problematic for her at the moment. Uranus quite recently was conjunct her Mars, and her solar arc Uranus was recently conjunct her Mars. Her solar arc Mars is just gone conjunct her Saturn. And so, I don't think that's easy for her at all, and it's just making things making things complicated. And look at her solar arc degrees Saturn. So she's got her IC at 7 degrees 1 Pisces. So solar arc Saturn is sort of about a year ago, just over, was on her IC. So it does seem, but when you look at Uranus conjunct her Mars, and Mars on her Saturn, and Saturn on her IC, it seems that those solar arc directions were exact about a year ago, and they're still in operation, but the peak problem might have been a year ago. So maybe things really started to become super difficult for her a year ago, when of course that was when sort of epstein was really hitting the news in a big way. And so what's happening to her at the moment may just be more of the same. And finally there's the composite chart between her and Andrew. I'm just putting this up to see if it tells us anything about the relationship. I mean, I'm not saying that the composite is going to in itself be interesting, but as I've been talking about Sarah Ferguson, I might as well talk about the composite. And so this composite, remember, what this composite does is it takes sort of a midpoint for both. It takes a midpoint of each of their planets and it sort of puts them together. And, this composite is, it's not, I would have said, especially interesting. It's, there's a Mercury-Saturn conjunction. And so the relationship is just sort of difficult, and it's not easy. It's not easy sort of perhaps intellectually and sort of mentally. And the Mars-Jupiter in Sagittarius probably represents those first few years after they got married, when they were popular. I think they were popular, and they were involved in celebrities, and celebrities used to visit them, and they were they tried to make themselves important. She was really into the sort of a bright lights and the television cameras, and she seemed sort of fairly sort of light, but quite bubbly. I think that was a word that was used for her, or one could use for her. But that was a Mars Jupiter Sagittarius. But maybe that Mars Jupiter Sagittarius it wore off. Finally, before I go, the wedding. They did get married on July the 23rd, 1986, and I think they got married at noon. So just a couple of things about the wedding. Mars was on the IC. I know Mars is in Capricorn, it's exalted in Capricorn, but it's still, having a Mars on the IC when you get married is not a good idea. Additionally, exact Sun-Mercury conjunction. I think this really illustrates that a Cazimi conjunction, Cazimi, to within 1 arc minute, didn't work. They made some serious mistakes, and Mercury is really burnt out by the Sun, and the Sun could represent the whole arrogance of the relationship, particularly perhaps the arrogance of Andrew. And so I think that getting married on a Sun-Mercury conjunction like that, not a good idea. Certainly not a good idea to get married with Mars on the IC. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say on the subject of Sarah Ferguson. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.